Prince Kethril walked through the long metal hallways of the flagship Dominion's Edge, with slow, careful steps. His purple robes made soft sounds as they moved against the cold floor. The young prince had never visited the detention facility before, but today felt different. His father, the Emperor, had told him to learn about all parts of their great ship, and the prince wanted to prove he could handle real responsibilities. The detention facility was deep inside the ship where they kept prisoners. From different worlds, Captain Vorthak led the way with his usual proud walk. The captain was tall even for a Vaxarian, and his dark green skin showed many battle scars. His red eyes looked ahead as he explained the security systems to the prince. "We keep the most dangerous prisoners here, Your Highness," Captain Vorthak said in his deep voice. "These humans are from the planet Earth. They fought against our forces during the last campaign. Very stubborn creatures, but not very smart." Prince Kethril nodded, but said nothing. He had heard stories about humans but had never seen them up close. The other princes at court always laughed when they talked about these small, weak beings from a distant world. They said humans had no real technology and fought with simple weapons like children playing war games. As they walked deeper into the facility, the prince noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the detention area were different today. Instead of the normal quiet, he could hear muffled voices and what sounded like metal hitting metal. Captain Vorthak stopped walking and his hand moved to his weapon. "That should not be happening," the captain said with worry in his voice. He spoke into his communication device but got no answer from the guards in the next section. The prince felt his heart beat faster, but tried to look calm like his father had taught him. They moved around the corner and saw something that made Captain Vorthak curse in the old Vaxarian language. The heavy security door to the human section was open and 2 guards lay on the floor. They were not moving, but the prince could see they were still breathing. Captain Vorthak drew his energy weapon and motioned for the prince to stay behind him. Inside the detention area, Prince Kethril saw his first humans. They were smaller than Vaxarians but moved with quick, smooth actions that surprised him. A tall human with short brown hair was giving orders to the others. His voice was calm and clear, even though they were in the middle of what looked like an escape attempt. "Jake, keep them busy while Amy works on the next door," the tall human said. "Ryan, take Danny and Lisa to watch the back entrance. We need 5 more minutes." Prince Kethril watched as the humans worked together like they had practiced this many times. They had somehow broken their metal restraints and were using pieces of the broken chains as tools and weapons. One human woman was doing something to an electronic lock while others stood guard around her. Captain Vorthak tried to move forward, but 3 humans blocked his path. They did not have energy weapons like the captain, but they moved in a way that made it hard for him to aim properly. The prince had never seen anyone move like that. The humans seemed to know where the captain would point his weapon before he did it. The tall human who seemed to be their leader stepped forward. Prince Kethril could see that this human had calm blue eyes that showed no fear. The human looked directly at Captain Vorthak, and then at the prince. "Commander Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force," the human said in clear Vaxarian language. "I assume you are here to stop us." Captain Vorthak raised his weapon higher. "Surrender now and your punishment will be less severe," he said in a voice that usually made enemies shake with fear. But the humans did not look afraid at all. Prince Kethril watched as more of his guards arrived from behind them. Now the humans were surrounded with nowhere to run. The prince expected them to give up, but instead something amazing happened. Commander Morrison made a small hand signal, and all the humans moved at the same time. It was like watching a dance that had been practiced for years. The humans split into groups, and each group had a job to do. Some created barriers using pieces of broken furniture, while others moved to protect their friends. The woman working on the lock never stopped her. Work even with energy weapons pointed at her. Captain Vorthak fired his weapon, but the humans had already moved to new positions. The prince realized that these humans were not just randomly running around. They had a plan, and everyone knew their part in it. This was not the behavior of simple primitive beings that he had been told about. The battle continued for several minutes, and Prince Kethril could not believe what he was seeing. His elite guards were some of the best fighters in the Empire. but they could not hit targets that seemed to know what they were going to do before they did it. The humans used everything around them as weapons or shields. They turned their weakness into strength by being smarter instead of stronger. Commander Morrison jumped over a fallen piece of metal and landed next to one of the guards. Before the guard could react, the human had taken his weapon and rolled away to safety. The other humans cheered but did not stop moving. The prince noticed that even when they celebrated, they kept working toward their goal. More guards arrived, and now the humans were really outnumbered. Prince Kethril expected this to be the end of the escape attempt, but the humans just changed their plan again. They moved closer together and created a tight formation that protected all sides. Commander Morrison was giving new orders, and everyone followed them without question. The prince had seen many military exercises and battles, but he had never seen coordination like this. His own guards were brave and well-trained, but they seemed confused by enemies who would not fight the way they expected. The humans fought like they could read each other's minds. Captain Vorthak was getting angry, and Prince Kethril could see that his pride was hurt. The captain had told the prince that humans were weak and stupid, but these humans were making his elite guards look foolish. The prince felt something strange as he watched the battle. Instead of being angry at the humans, he found himself curious about how they did such amazing things with so little. As the fighting continued, Prince Kethril made a decision that would surprise everyone on the ship. Prince Kethril stepped forward and raised his hand high in the air. His voice cut through the sounds of battle like a sharp blade through cloth. All guards stop fighting immediately and lower your weapons. The detention area became quiet, so fast that the prince could hear his own heartbeat. Captain Vorthak turned to look at him with wide red eyes full of shock and confusion. The other guards stopped moving but kept their weapons ready. They looked between the prince and their captain, not sure what to do. "Your Highness, what are you doing?" Captain Vorthak asked in a voice that was trying to stay respectful but clearly disagreed with the order. "These prisoners are dangerous and they are escaping. We must stop them now." The humans also stopped fighting, but they stayed in their protective formation. Commander Morrison kept his eyes on the prince while speaking quietly to his people. The human woman who had been working on the lock stopped what she was doing, but her hand stayed near the electronic panel. Prince Kethril walked slowly toward the humans. Captain Vorthak moved to follow him, but the prince held up his hand again. "Stay where you are, Captain. I want to speak with these humans alone." "Your Highness, that is not safe," Captain Vorthak said with more worry in his voice. "They are enemies of the Empire and they cannot be trusted. Please let us finish this properly." But Prince Kethril continued walking toward Commander Morrison. The prince had learned many languages as part of his royal education, and he could speak the human language called English. When he was close enough to see the details of the human's face, he stopped and spoke in English. "Commander Morrison, I am Prince Kethril of the Vaxarian Empire. I have been watching your escape attempt and I have questions for you." Commander Morrison looked surprised that the prince knew his name and could speak English. The other humans moved slightly closer to their leader, but they did not raise their improvised weapons. The prince noticed that even in this strange situation, the humans were ready to protect each other. "What kind of questions, Your Highness?" Commander Morrison asked. His voice was calm, but the prince could hear caution in it. "And why did you stop your guards from capturing us?" Prince Kethril looked around at the detention area and saw the broken restraints, the improvised tools, and the way the humans had used everything around them. "How did you coordinate your movements so perfectly? How did you know where my guards would attack before they did it? How did you break restraints that are supposed to hold beings much stronger than humans?" The human leader was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to tell the prince. Behind Commander Morrison, the other humans waited patiently for his decision. The prince noticed that they trusted their leader completely, even in this dangerous situation. "We trained together," Commander Morrison finally said. "We learned to work as a team and to use our minds instead of just our strength. Every human in my unit knows how to lead and how to follow. We practice until we can fight together without needing to talk." Captain Vorthak made an angry sound from where he stood. "Your Highness, these are just excuses. Humans are weak and primitive. They got lucky today, but they are still our prisoners." Prince Kethril turned to look at his captain. Captain Vorthak, how many of your guards did these weak, primitive humans defeat or disable? The captain's green skin became darker, which happened when Vaxarians felt embarrassed. That is not important, Your Highness. We were not prepared for their tricks and deception. Tricks, the prince asked as he looked back at Commander Morrison. Is that what you call it, Commander? Were you using tricks to defeat our guards? Commander Morrison shook his head. We call it tactics, Your Highness. We study our enemies and we adapt to each situation. Every fight teaches us something new about how to be better fighters. The prince felt excitement growing inside him. This was exactly what he had hoped to learn about during his visit to the detention facility. Not just how to keep prisoners locked up, but how different beings thought and fought and solved problems. Tell me more about these tactics, Prince Kethril said. How do you train your people to move together like that? How do you make decisions so quickly in battle? The human woman who had been working on the lock stepped forward. She had red hair and green eyes that reminded the prince of his own people's eyes. Commander, should we be telling him this? She asked in English. Lieutenant Amy Collins, meet Prince Kethril, Commander Morrison said to his officer. Then he looked back at the prince. Your Highness, my people are wondering why you want to know about our fighting methods. Prince Kethril realized that he had not thought about how his questions might sound to the humans. From their point of view, he was the enemy asking them to reveal their secrets. But the prince felt that this was more important than just capturing escaped prisoners. I want to understand how you think, the prince said honestly. My tutors tell me that humans are simple beings who only know how to fight with primitive weapons. But I just watched you defeat some of our best guards using nothing but broken chains and quick thinking. Another human stepped forward. This one was shorter, with dark skin and a serious expression. Sergeant Ryan Hayes, Your Highness, Commander, Morrison said by way of introduction. He is wondering if this is some kind of trap. Prince Kethril looked at each of the humans and saw the same careful intelligence in all their eyes. These were not simple, primitive beings. These were warriors who had learned to think and fight in ways that his own people did not understand. There is no trap, the prince said. I give you my word as a prince of the Empire. I stopped the fighting because I want to learn from you, not trick you. Captain Vorthak spoke from behind him. Your Highness, this is highly irregular. The Emperor expects us to maintain proper security and discipline. Talking with prisoners like this is not appropriate. Prince Kethril turned to face his captain and all the other guards who were still standing ready with their weapons. Captain, I'm ordering you and all guards to lower your weapons and step back. These humans are not going anywhere, and I want to continue this conversation. The captain looked like he wanted to argue more, but royal orders could not be questioned. He signaled to his guards and they all stepped back and lowered their weapons. The tension in the room decreased, but everyone remained alert. Commander Morrison looked at his own people, and the prince could see a silent conversation happening between them. After a moment, the human leader nodded, and his people relaxed slightly, but stayed in formation. What exactly do you want to know, Your Highness, Commander? Morrison asked. Prince Kethril smiled for the first time since entering the detention facility. Everything. Prince Kethril spent the next hour asking questions and listening to answers that changed everything he thought he knew about humans. Commander Morrison explained how human military units trained together for years until they could fight as one, mind in many bodies. Lieutenant Collins described how they studied enemy patterns and adapted their tactics for each new situation. Sergeant Hayes talked about leadership methods where every soldier could make decisions and take command when needed. The more the prince learned, the more excited he became. His own military followed strict rules and rigid formations that had worked for thousands of years. But the humans had developed something completely different. They had created a way of fighting that used flexibility and creativity instead of just strength and superior weapons. Captain Vorthak stood nearby, getting more frustrated with every minute that passed. The other guards looked confused about why. Their prince was having a friendly conversation with escaped prisoners. Some of them whispered to each other when they thought the prince was not listening. Finally, Prince Kethril made a decision that shocked everyone in the detention facility. He stood up straight and spoke in his most formal royal voice so that everyone could hear him clearly. I, Prince Kethril, heir to the Vaxarian Empire, do hereby propose a formal military exercise between the elite guards of this ship and the human prisoners under the command of Commander Morrison. The silence that followed was so complete that the EHITT prince could hear the humming of the ship's engines far below them. Captain Vorthak's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "Your Highness, that is impossible," the captain finally said. "We cannot have military exercises with prisoners. It goes against all regulations and protocols. The Emperor would never approve such a thing." Prince Kethril looked at his captain with the same calm expression his father used when making important decisions. "Captain Vorthak, are you questioning my authority to make decisions about military matters on this ship?" The captain's skin became very dark green, which meant he was both angry and afraid. "No, Your Highness, I would never question your authority. But this request is highly unusual and potentially dangerous." Commander Morrison stepped forward and spoke carefully. "Your Highness, what kind of military exercise are you proposing, and what would happen to the winners and losers?" The prince had not thought about all the details, but he knew this was the right thing to do. "A combat simulation in the ship's training facility. Your people against an equal number of our guards. The same weapons and equipment for both sides." "Lieutenant." Collins whispered something to Commander Morrison in English. The prince heard her mention something about it being a trap, but the commander shook his head. "What would be the stakes, Your Highness?" Commander Morrison asked. "What does the winning side get and what happens to the losing side?" Prince Kethril thought for a moment. He needed to make the stakes important enough that both sides would take it seriously, but not so extreme that his father would punish him for making unauthorized agreements. If the humans win, they will receive better quarters, improved food, and access to educational materials about Vaxarian culture and technology. If the guards win, the humans will accept additional work duties and stricter security protocols. Captain Vorthak made a choking sound. "Your Highness, you cannot promise prisoners better treatment for defeating our own guards. What message does that send to the rest of the ship?" "It sends the message that excellence should be rewarded regardless of which species demonstrates it," the prince replied firmly. "Are you suggesting that our guards might lose to a group of primitive humans, Captain?" The captain realized he had been trapped by his own previous statements about human weakness. If humans were really as inferior as he claimed, then the guards should easily win the exercise. If he continued to object, it would seem like he was afraid his guards might lose. "Of course not, Your Highness," Captain Vorthak said through clenched teeth. "Our guards are the finest warriors in the Empire. They will easily defeat any human challenge." Commander Morrison looked at his people, and the prince could see them having another one of their silent conversations. Sergeant Hayes nodded slightly, and Lieutenant Collins shrugged as if to say why not. The other humans, whose names the prince had not learned yet, also seemed to agree. "We accept your challenge, Your Highness," Commander Morrison said. "When would this exercise take place, and what are the specific rules?" Prince Kethril felt a thrill of excitement run through his body. He was about to witness something that had never happened before in the history of the Vaxarian Empire. Tomorrow at midday in Training Facility 7. Each side will have 10 fighters, standard training weapons, and protective gear. The objective will be to capture and hold the central command post for 10 minutes. "Your Highness," Captain Vorthak said with desperation in his voice, "I must protest this decision. The other ship commanders will hear about this, and they will question your judgment. Some may even report this to the Emperor." The prince turned to face his captain directly. "Captain Vorthak, let me be very clear about something. I am not asking for your opinion or permission. I am giving you a direct order. Select your 10 best guards and prepare them for tomorrow's exercise. If you continue to question my authority, I will report your insubordination to my father personally." Captain Vorthak stepped back as if he had been struck. In all his years of service, he had never been spoken to so harshly by any member of the royal family. But he also knew that the prince was not making empty threats. Royal displeasure could end a military career very quickly. "Yes, Your Highness," the captain said in a tight voice. "I will select our best fighters and prepare them for the exercise." Commander Morrison spoke up again. "Your Highness, will my people be allowed to prepare for this exercise, or are we expected to fight immediately? You will have the same preparation time as our guards, the prince replied. You will be moved to a larger holding area where you can plan and train together. You will also receive proper meals and rest before the exercise. Lieutenant Collins looked surprised. That is very fair, Your Highness. More fair than we expected, Prince O. Kethril smiled at the human woman. I want this to be a true test of abilities, Lieutenant Collins. It would not be meaningful if one side had advantages that had nothing to do with fighting skills. Sergeant Hayes stepped forward and spoke for the first time directly to the prince. Your Highness, why are you doing this? What do you hope to learn from this exercise? The prince looked at each of the humans and then at his own guards. I want to see which methods of fighting and leadership work better, the old ways that we have always used or the new ways that you have developed. Captain Vorthak made another angry sound but said nothing. The other guards looked even more confused than before. None of them had ever heard a member of the royal family suggest that alien methods might be better than Vaxarian traditions. Commander Morrison nodded slowly. We understand, Your Highness. This will be a learning experience for everyone involved. Exactly, Prince Kethril said. Captain Vorthak, please escort our guests to the larger holding area and see that they have everything they need for tomorrow's preparation. I want both sides to be at their absolute best. As the guards began to move the humans toward their new quarters, Prince Kethril felt both excitement and nervousness about what would happen tomorrow. He had just set in motion something that could change how his people thought about fighting and leadership forever. Prince Kethril could not sleep that night. His mind kept thinking about the upcoming exercise and what it might reveal about human fighting methods. Early the next morning, he made his way to the observation deck that overlooked the holding area, where the humans were preparing. What he saw amazed him more than anything he had witnessed the day before. The humans had transformed their holding area into a training ground using nothing but furniture and improvised materials. They had created mock barriers and practice targets from bedding and eating utensils. Every human was actively involved in some form of preparation. Commander Morrison stood in the center giving instructions to his team. But the prince noticed something unusual about how the human leader worked. Instead of just telling his people what to do, Morrison asked each person for their ideas and opinions. Lieutenant Collins was drawing diagrams on the floor using pieces of food while explaining something about flanking movements. Sergeant Hayes had taken 3 other humans to one corner where they were practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques. The prince watched as Hayes showed them how to disarm an opponent who had a larger reach and more strength. The humans took turns being the attacker and the defender until everyone understood the technique perfectly. 2 humans whose names the prince did not know were working together to study the room layout and discuss possible strategies. They moved around the space, pointing at different areas and talking about sight lines and cover positions. The prince realized they were memorizing every detail of their environment so they could use it to their advantage. What impressed the prince most was how naturally the humans shared leadership responsibilities. When Commander Morrison was busy with one group, Lieutenant Collins took charge of another. When both officers were occupied, Sergeant Hayes stepped up to coordinate activities. Every human seemed capable of leading and following as the situation required. Prince Kethril remembered his own military training where students learned to follow orders without question. Vaxarian military doctrine emphasized discipline and obedience above all other qualities. Soldiers were taught to trust their superiors completely and never to question orders even when they seemed wrong. But these humans were doing something completely different. They challenged each other's ideas and suggested improvements to their plans. They argued about tactics and strategies, but never in an angry way. Every disagreement seemed to make their final plan stronger and better. The prince decided to visit the training area where his own guards were preparing. Captain Vorthak had selected 10 of his best fighters, and they were running through standard combat drills. The guards moved in perfect formation and followed every command exactly as they had been taught. Prince Kethril watched his guards practice for an hour and noticed something troubling. They were preparing to fight the same way they always fought. The same formations, the same tactics, and the same rigid responses to different situations. Captain Vorthak was not preparing his guards for an enemy that might fight differently than anything they had faced before. "Captain Vorthak," the prince said as he approached the training area, "how are your preparations going?" The captain turned and saluted smartly. "Very well, Your Highness. My guards are ready to demonstrate the superiority of proper Vaxarian military training. Have you considered that the humans might use different tactics than what your guards are used to facing?" the prince asked. Captain Vorthak looked confused by the question. "Your Highness, there are only so many ways to fight effectively. Our methods have been proven successful for thousands of years. These humans cannot possibly have developed anything that we have not already encountered and defeated." Prince Kethril felt worried about his captain's confidence. "But yesterday these same humans surprised your guards and caused considerable difficulty. Should that not suggest that they might surprise you again?" "Yesterday was different, Your Highness," the captain replied. "We were not prepared for combat and we were following orders to be careful around a member of the royal family. Today will be a proper military exercise where we can demonstrate our true abilities." The prince left the guard training area feeling even more concerned. His guards were preparing to fight an enemy they did not understand using methods that had not worked well the day before. Meanwhile, the humans were adapting and innovating and preparing for something completely new. That afternoon, Prince Kethril returned to observe the humans one more time before the exercise began. He was amazed to see that they had completely reorganized their preparation activities. Now they were practicing scenarios that seemed specifically designed to counter traditional Vaxarian tactics. Lieutenant Collins was explaining to her teammates how Vaxarian guards typically responded to different types of attacks. She had somehow learned about standard Vaxarian military procedures just by observing the guards who had brought them food and supervised their activities. "They always advance in straight lines," Collins was saying, "and they always try to overwhelm enemies with superior firepower rather than using maneuver and deception." Sergeant Hayes added his own observations. "Their armor is strong, but it limits their mobility. They cannot move quickly in tight spaces, and they have trouble changing direction rapidly." Commander Morrison nodded and pointed to marks they had made on the floor. "So we use the environment to force them into situations where their advantages become disadvantages. We make them fight in ways they are not used to." The prince realized that the humans had been studying their captors just as carefully as warriors study an enemy before battle. They had noticed details about Vaxarian equipment behavior and tactics that even some Vaxarian officers might not have understood. One of the humans whose name the prince still did not know was practicing movements that looked like a strange dance. When the prince looked more carefully, he saw that the human was rehearsing ways to avoid energy weapon fire by moving in unpredictable patterns. Another human was working with pieces of their improvised equipment, testing different ways to create temporary shields and barriers. The prince watched as this human discovered that certain materials could deflect or absorb energy weapon blasts better than others. The most impressive thing was how all these individual preparations fitted together into a larger plan. Every human knew not just their own job, but also how their job connected to what everyone else was doing. They had created a strategy that used each person's strengths, while covering for each person's weaknesses. Prince Kethril thought about his own guards who were probably still practicing the same formations they had learned years ago. Each guard was excellent at his individual job, but they depended on their officers to coordinate everything they did. If something unexpected happened that was not covered in their training, they would have to wait for new orders before adapting. As the time for the exercise approached, the prince felt more nervous than excited. He had wanted to see a fair test of different fighting methods, but now he worried that it might not be fair at all. Not because one side had better weapons or equipment, but because one side had prepared for the unknown, while the other side had prepared for the familiar. The prince made one final observation before leaving to oversee the exercise setup. The humans were not just preparing to win a training exercise. They were preparing to prove that their way of thinking and fighting could succeed against opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better equipped. For them, this was about much more than earning better food and quarters. This was about showing that intelligence and adaptability could triumph over tradition and superior force. Training Facility 7 was the largest combat simulation area on the ship. Prince Kethril stood in the observation booth, high above the holographic battlefield that stretched out below him. The facility could create any environment from jungle, planets to asteroid mining stations. For today's exercise, he had chosen an urban combat zone with building streets and various obstacles. Captain Vorthak entered the observation booth wearing his full ceremonial armor. His 10 selected guards were already in the staging area checking their equipment one final time. Each guard carried a standard energy rifle, protective armor, and communication gear. They looked confident and ready for what they expected to be an easy victory. "Your Highness, my guards are prepared to demonstrate proper military excellence," Captain Vorthak said with pride in his voice. "This exercise will prove that Vaxarian training methods are superior to any primitive human tactics." Prince Kethril nodded but said nothing. He was watching the human team as they entered their staging area on the opposite side of the facility. Commander Morrison had arranged his people in a circle, and they were having what looked like a final planning session. Every human was listening carefully and occasionally adding comments or suggestions. The exercise rules were simple. Both teams would start at opposite ends of the simulated city. In the center was a command post building that had to be captured and held for 10 continuous minutes. The team that controlled the command post when time ran out would be declared the winner. Both sides had the same weapons and equipment, including non-lethal training versions of standard energy weapons. Prince Kethril activated the communication system. "Both teams prepare for exercise start. You have 2 minutes to reach your starting positions." The Vaxarian guards moved out in perfect formation. They advanced down the main street in 2 columns with scouts ahead and support weapons in the rear. It was exactly the formation that Prince Kethril had seen in hundreds of training exercises. Professional, disciplined, and predictable. The human team moved out very differently. Instead of staying together, they immediately split into smaller groups that disappeared into different parts of the city. Prince Kethril lost sight of most of them within the first minute. Only Commander Morrison and 1 other human remained visible as they moved carefully through the shadows between buildings. "Where did they go?" Captain Vorthak asked with confusion in his voice. "They should be advancing toward the objective, not hiding like cowards." Prince Kethril studied the displays that showed the entire battlefield from multiple angles. The humans had not disappeared. They had spread out through the city using routes that kept them hidden from the main streets where the guards were advancing. It was like they had become part of the environment itself. The first contact came when the Vaxarian guards were halfway to the command post. 2 guards at the front of the formation suddenly found themselves under fire from 3 different directions. Energy bolts came from a rooftop, a ground floor window, and an alley entrance. The guards took cover and returned fire, but their targets had already moved to new positions. "Ambush tactics," Captain Vorthak said with disgust. "They are afraid to fight like honorable warriors." But Prince Kethril was watching something much more interesting than a simple ambush. The human attacks were coordinated to herd the guards into a specific area where the streets were narrower and there were fewer escape routes. When the guards moved to avoid one attack, they walked directly into the killing zone of another human team. Sergeant Hayes appeared on a rooftop with 2 other humans. They fired down at the guards, forcing them to take cover in a courtyard surrounded by tall buildings. As soon as the guards were in the courtyard, Lieutenant Collins and her team emerged from hidden positions and attacked from ground level. The guards found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple directions. Their formation, that had looked so professional on the open street, became a liability in the confined space. They could not maneuver effectively, and their superior firepower was less useful when they could not see their targets clearly. Prince Kethril watched as Commander Morrison appeared behind the guards with the rest of his team. The humans had somehow circled around the entire Vaxarian formation without being detected. Now the guards were surrounded and under attack from every direction. Captain Vorthak was speaking urgently into his communication device, giving orders to his trapped guards. "Reform into defensive circle and prepare for breakthrough attempt. Use maximum firepower to clear an escape route." The guards tried to follow their captain's orders, but the humans had anticipated this response. Every time the guards concentrated their fire in one direction, the humans in that area faded away, while attacks intensified from other directions. It was like fighting smoke that could shoot back. One by one, the guards were eliminated from the exercise as their armor registered hits from human weapons. The training facility's computer announced each elimination with a neutral voice that somehow made the guard's defeat sound even more complete. Guard 7 eliminated. Guard 3 eliminated. Guard 10 eliminated. Prince Kethril noticed that the humans were not just randomly shooting at targets. They were systematically isolating and eliminating specific guards in a planned sequence. First, they took out the communications specialist, then the heavy weapons operator, then the squad leaders. Each elimination made the remaining guards less effective and more confused. Captain Vorthak was becoming more frustrated with every announcement. "This is not proper combat," he said angrily. "They are using tricks and deception instead of honest fighting." "Is deception not a legitimate military tactic, Captain?" Prince Kethril asked. "Did our own forces not use similar methods during the conquest of the Zephyrian colonies?" The captain had no good answer for that question. The Vaxarian Empire had indeed used ambush tactics, stealth attacks, and psychological warfare when it served their purposes. The difference was that they had always had superior numbers and equipment to fall back on when clever tactics were not enough. The exercise continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The remaining guards were pinned down and unable to advance toward their objective. Meanwhile, small groups of humans had infiltrated the command post area and were setting up defensive positions. When the final guard was eliminated, Commander Morrison's voice came over the communication system. "Command post secured. Beginning 10-minute countdown." Prince Kethril looked at the tactical display and saw that the humans had not just captured the objective. They had done it while losing only 2 of their own people. The final score was 8 humans versus 0 guards remaining in the exercise. Captain Vorthak stared at the display in shock. "This is impossible," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "Our guards are the best trained warriors in the fleet. They cannot have been defeated by a handful of primitive humans." But Prince Kethril was watching something even more remarkable than the lopsided final score. The humans were not celebrating their victory. Instead, they were analyzing what had happened and discussing how they could have done it better. Lieutenant Collins was pointing out mistakes they had made while Sergeant Hayes was suggesting improvements to their coordination. Commander Morrison gathered his team together and began what looked like a formal after-action review. He asked each person to describe what they had learned and what they would do differently next time. Even in victory, they were focused on becoming better fighters. The 10-minute countdown reached 0, and the exercise officially ended. The holographic city disappeared, and the facility returned to its normal appearance. Both teams gathered in the center of the room for the formal conclusion of the exercise. Prince Kethril descended from the observation booth to meet with both groups. Captain Vorthak followed him looking like a warrior who had just discovered that everything he believed about fighting was wrong. "Congratulations, Commander Morrison," the prince said as he approached the human team. "Your victory was complete and impressive." Commander Morrison saluted in the human military style. "Thank you, Your Highness. Your guards fought bravely and we learned much from facing them." The prince turned to look at his own guards who stood in formation despite their defeat. Their faces showed confusion, embarrassment, and anger. They had been trained to believe that they were the finest warriors in the galaxy, and today that belief had been shattered. "Captain Vorthak," Prince Kethril said formally, "do you have any comments about today's exercise?" The captain struggled to find words that would explain what had happened, without admitting that his fundamental beliefs about warfare had been proven wrong. Finally, he managed to speak. "The humans fought differently than we expected, Your Highness. Their methods were unusual, and we were not prepared for such tactics." Prince Kethril nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Captain, they did fight differently. The question now is what we should learn from this experience." News of the human victory spread through the ship faster than Prince Kethril had expected. By evening, the entire crew knew that 10 human prisoners had defeated the elite guards in a formal military exercise. The reaction was immediate and intense. Prince Kethril sat in his private quarters reviewing reports from different department heads throughout the ship. Each report expressed shock, concern, and in some cases anger about what had happened in the training facility. The prince had expected some negative reactions, but the intensity surprised him. Captain Vorthak requested an urgent meeting and arrived at the prince's quarters with several other senior officers. The captain's green skin was darker than usual, which meant he was still dealing with strong emotions about his guard's defeat. "Your Highness," Captain Vorthak began carefully. "The other ship commanders have been sending messages asking for explanations about today's exercise. Some are questioning whether proper military protocols were followed." Prince Kethril looked at each of the officers who had come with his captain. He recognized them as some of the most senior military leaders on the ship. Their faces showed the same confusion and concern that he had seen in Captain Vorthak. "What specific concerns are being raised?" the prince asked in a calm voice that hid his own growing worry about how this situation might develop. Commander Zethrak, the ship's tactical officer, stepped forward. "Your Highness, many officers are suggesting that the exercise was unfair to our guards. They believe the humans must have had advanced knowledge of the training facility layout or access to intelligence about our standard tactics. Others are saying that the humans used illegal techniques that would not be allowed in real combat," added Captain Morphin, the security chief. "They point out that the exercise rules may have favored the human fighting style over proper military methods." Prince Kethril felt a flash of anger at these excuses, but he controlled his expression. "Are you suggesting that I deliberately set up an unfair exercise that would make our own guards look incompetent?" The officers quickly shook their heads and made reassuring sounds. None of them wanted to directly accuse a member of the royal family of sabotaging Vaxarian military honor, but their meaning was clear enough. "Of course not, Your Highness," Captain Vorthak said hastily. "We simply believe that the exercise may not have been an accurate test of real military capabilities. Perhaps the conditions were too artificial or the rules too restrictive." Prince Kethril stood up and walked to the large window that showed the stars outside the ship. He had known this conversation would come, but he had hoped the officers would be more open to learning from what had happened. "Tell me something, Captain Vorthak," the prince said without turning around. "If our guards had won today's exercise, would you be here questioning the fairness of the conditions?" The silence that followed answered the question better than any words could have. The officers were not really concerned about fairness. They were concerned about their pride and their beliefs about Vaxarian superiority. "The humans honored our agreement," Prince Kethril continued. "They have been moved to better quarters and given improved food as promised. They have also been provided with educational materials about our culture and technology." Commander Zethrak made a choking sound. "Your Highness, you cannot seriously intend to reward prisoners for defeating our own forces. What message does that send to the rest of the fleet?" The prince turned to face the officers directly. "It sends the message that I keep my word regardless of whether the outcome pleases me or not. Are you suggesting that a prince of the empire should break his promises when the results are inconvenient?" Again, the officers could not argue directly with the prince's logic. A royal promise was sacred in Vaxarian culture, and breaking such a promise would be seen as deeply dishonorable. But their frustration was obvious. "Your Highness," Captain Morphin said carefully, "some officers are concerned that news of this defeat will spread to other ships and damage morale throughout the fleet. They suggest that we should restrict information about what happened today." Prince Kethril had been expecting this suggestion. Military organizations did not like to admit when their methods failed, especially when the failure was so complete and public. "So you want to hide the truth because it makes us look bad," the prince said bluntly. "You want to pretend that nothing important happened today so that we can continue believing that our way of fighting is perfect." Captain Vorthak shifted uncomfortably. "Your Highness, we simply think that this incident should be treated as a special case, rather than something that requires changes to our established procedures." "A special case," the prince repeated. "Tell me, Captain, what would happen if we encountered these humans in real combat tomorrow? Would their tactics suddenly stop working because we decided this was a special case?" The question hung in the air while the officers struggled to find an answer that would not admit the obvious truth. The humans had defeated the guards using methods that could be used again in any similar situation. Prince Kethril decided to push harder. "Let me ask you something else. If an enemy force used the same tactics against one of our military installations, what would be the likely outcome?" Commander Zethrak looked very uncomfortable. Your Highness, that would depend on many factors, including the specific situation and the quality of our defensive preparations. But based on what you observed today, would you expect our forces to perform better or worse than they did in the training facility? The prince pressed. The tactical officer was quiet for a long moment before answering. Possibly worse, Your Highness. Real combat conditions would likely favor the side using unconventional tactics even more than artificial exercise conditions. This admission sent a visible shock through the other officers. Commander Zethrak had just acknowledged that the human victory was not a fluke or an unfair result. It was a demonstration of genuinely superior tactical methods that could be repeated in real situations. Prince Kethril felt a mix of satisfaction and concern about this admission. He was pleased that at least one officer was willing to face the truth, but he was worried about what this meant for the Empire's military effectiveness. So we have established that the human tactics were not tricks or cheating, the prince said. We have also established that these same tactics could be effective in real combat situations. The question now is what we should do with this information. Captain Vorthak made one last attempt to maintain the status quo. Your Highness, perhaps we could study these human methods and develop countermeasures that would neutralize their effectiveness. That way we could maintain our current procedures while protecting against this specific threat. Prince Kethril shook his head. Captain, you are still thinking about this wrong. The humans are not our real enemy. They showed us weaknesses in our own methods that any intelligent enemy could exploit. The real threat is continuing to fight the same way when we know it can be defeated. The officers exchanged glances as they began to understand what the prince was suggesting. He was not just talking about defending against human tactics. He was talking about learning from them and possibly adopting them. Your Highness, Captain, Morphin said slowly, are you suggesting that we should change our military procedures based on what happened today? I am suggesting that we should learn from anyone who can teach us something valuable, the prince replied. Even if that someone happens to be a human prisoner. The silence that followed was even longer than before. The officers were contemplating something that went against everything they had been taught about Vaxarian military superiority and the primitive nature of human warfare. Finally, Captain Vorthak spoke in a voice that sounded very tired. Your Highness, what exactly are you proposing that we do? Prince Kethril looked at each of the officers standing in his quarters and made a decision that would change the course of Vaxarian military history. He walked to his desk and activated his personal communication system with the full authority of his royal position. I am calling an emergency meeting of all senior officers on this ship, the prince announced. The meeting will take place in 1 hour in the main conference room. Attendance is mandatory for all department heads and unit. Commanders. Captain Vorthak looked alarmed. Your Highness, what is the purpose of this meeting? Should we prepare any specific materials or briefings? The purpose, Captain, is to address the military implications of today's exercise and to announce new policies that will affect how this ship operates, the prince replied. No special preparations are needed, but I want everyone to bring an open mind. The officers left to spread word of the meeting, and Prince Kethril spent the next hour preparing for what he knew would be the most important speech of his young life. He was about to challenge thousands of years of Vaxarian military tradition, and he needed to do it in a way that would convince rather than simply command. When the hour was up, Prince Kethril entered the main conference room to find it packed, with more than 50 senior officers. The tension in the room was so thick he could almost feel it pressing against his skin. Word of the human victory had reached everyone, and they were all wondering what the prince planned to do about it. Prince Kethril took his place at the head of the long conference table and looked out at the sea of green faces that were all focused on him. Some expressions showed curiosity, others showed concern, and a few showed barely hidden anger about the day's events. Officers of the Dominion's Edge, the prince began in a clear, strong voice. Today we witnessed something that has never happened before in the history of our empire. A group of human prisoners defeated our elite guards in a formal military exercise, using tactics and methods that our people did not understand. Murmurs rippled through the room as officers who had not yet heard the full details reacted to this confirmation of the rumors they had been hearing. Many of you are wondering how such a thing could have happened, the prince continued. Some of you believe that the exercise was unfair, or that the humans used illegal methods. I am here to tell you that both of those beliefs are wrong. Murmurs grew louder and Prince Kethril held up his hand for silence. The humans won because they have developed methods of warfare that are superior to our own in certain situations. They have learned to fight with flexibility, creativity, and adaptation, while we have relied on rigid formations, superior technology, and overwhelming force. Commander Zethrak stood up from his seat. Your Highness, are you suggesting that human, military methods are better than Vaxarian methods that have been proven successful for thousands of years? Prince Kethril looked directly at the tactical officer. I am suggesting, Commander, that any military method can be improved, and that we would be fools to ignore lessons that could make us stronger. Captain Morphin also stood up. Your Highness, with respect, the humans are still our prisoners. How can we learn military tactics from beings that we conquered and captured? An excellent question, Captain, the prince replied. The answer is that being conquered does not make someone stupid, and being a conqueror does not make someone perfect. The humans lost battles against our empire, but they learned from those defeats and developed new methods. We won those battles, but we learned nothing new and our methods stayed the same. The room erupted in dozens of conversations as officers debated among themselves whether the prince was right or wrong. Prince Kethril let them talk for a few minutes before calling for silence again. I have made a decision that some of you will find controversial, the prince announced. I am requesting that Commander Morrison and his senior officers become military advisors to this ship's combat operations. The silence that followed was so complete that Prince Kethril could hear the ventilation systems humming in the walls. Then the room exploded in shocked voices as officers tried to process what they had just heard. Your Highness, that is impossible, Captain Vorthak shouted over the noise. We cannot have enemy prisoners serving as military advisors. It goes against every regulation and protocol in the Empire. They are not enemy prisoners anymore, Captain, Prince Kethril replied calmly. As of today, they are military consultants with provisional status as allies of the Empire. The shouting grew even louder as officers realized that the prince was serious about this unprecedented decision. Prince Kethril stood quietly and waited for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he continued with his explanation. For too long we have believed that our way of fighting is the only correct way. Today proved that belief is dangerous and wrong. If we continue to ignore better methods simply because they come from other species, we will eventually face enemies who will not ignore them. Captain Vorthak made one last desperate attempt to change the prince's mind. Your Highness the Emperor will never approve of this decision. When he learns that you have made prisoners into advisors, he will override your authority and punish everyone involved. Prince Kethril had been expecting this argument and he was ready for it. Captain, I am not just a prince making decisions about ship operations. I am the heir to the Empire making decisions about military policy that affects our entire civilization. My authority in these matters comes directly from the Emperor himself. This statement caused another wave of shocked murmurs. The officers were beginning to understand that this was not just about one ship or one exercise. The prince was talking about changes that could affect the entire imperial military. Your Highness, Commander Zethrak said carefully, what exactly would these human advisors do? What would be their role and responsibilities? They would observe our training exercises and suggest improvements to our tactics. They would help develop new methods that combine the best of human and Vaxarian approaches. Most importantly, they would teach our officers to think differently about how warfare should be conducted. The room was quiet again as officers contemplated the implications of having humans involved in military planning and training. It was such a radical departure from normal practice that many of them could not quite believe it was really happening. There will be strict limits on their access to sensitive information, the prince added, and they will be supervised at all times by trusted Vaxarian officers. But within those limits, they will have the authority to recommend changes to our procedures and methods. Captain Morphin raised another objection. Your Highness, what if other ships refuse to accept these changes? What if the rest of the fleet rejects the idea of learning from humans? Prince Kethril smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Then, Captain, we will have an interesting test of which approach works better. Ships that adopt the new, methods versus ships that stick to the old ones. I am confident about which side will prove more effective. The meeting continued for another hour, as officers asked questions and raised concerns about the practical details of implementing such a revolutionary change. But Prince Kethril could see that many of them were beginning to accept the idea even if they did not like it. When the meeting finally ended, Prince Kethril felt both exhausted and exhilarated. He had just committed himself and his ship to a course of action that would either prove his wisdom or destroy his career. But he was convinced that it was the right thing to do, regardless of the personal cost. 3 months after the historic military exercise, the Dominion's Edge had become the most talked-about ship in the Vaxarian fleet. Reports of its improved combat effectiveness and innovative training methods had spread throughout the Empire, causing both excitement and controversy among military leaders. Prince Kethril stood in the newly created Human Vaxarian Military Advisory Council chamber, watching Commander Morrison conduct a briefing for a group of Vaxarian officers. The room had been specially designed to accommodate both species with adjustable furniture and dual-language displays. The key to successful ambush tactics, Commander Morrison was explaining to his audience, is not just hiding from your enemy, but controlling when and where the engagement begins. You want to force the enemy to fight on your terms, not theirs. Lieutenant Collins stood at a tactical display showing a 3-dimensional battlefield. She pointed to different positions as she described how small units could coordinate their movements to appear larger and more threatening than they actually were. Deception is not about lying to your enemy, she said. It is about making them see what you want them to see so they make the decisions you want them to make. Prince Kethril noticed that the Vaxarian officers were taking careful notes and asking detailed questions. The initial resistance to learning from humans had gradually given way to genuine curiosity about these new methods. The turning point had come when the ship's first joint training exercise had shown dramatic improvements in overall combat effectiveness. Sergeant Hayes was working with a group of junior officers in one corner of the room. He was teaching them how to improvise weapons and tools from common materials. The prince watched as young Vaxarian lieutenants learned to see their environment as a source of tactical advantages, rather than just obstacles to overcome. In real combat, you will not always have perfect equipment or ideal conditions, Hayes was saying. The side that adapts fastest to unexpected situations is usually the side that wins. Captain Vorthak entered the chamber and approached Prince Kethril. The captain's attitude toward the human advisors had changed dramatically over the past 3 months. His initial hostility had been replaced by grudging respect, and eventually by genuine appreciation for what they brought to the ship's capabilities. "Your Highness," Captain Vorthak said quietly, "we have received a message from the Imperial Military Command. They are requesting a formal demonstration of our new training methods." Prince Kethril felt a mix of excitement and nervousness about this news. A formal demonstration would mean that his father and the highest levels of Imperial leadership were taking notice of what was happening on his ship. "When and where will this demonstration take place, Captain?" the prince asked. "Next month at the Imperial War College on Vaxos Prime, Your Highness. 3 other ships will participate in joint exercises to test the effectiveness of different training approaches." This was exactly what Prince Kethril had hoped would happen. The Imperial Military Command was going to conduct their own test of traditional methods versus the new hybrid approach that his ship had developed. Commander Morrison finished his briefing and walked over to where the prince and captain were standing. The human leader had adapted well to his new role as a military advisor. He wore a modified Vaxarian uniform that had been specially designed to accommodate human physiology while showing his official status. "Commander Morrison," Prince Kethril said, "we have just received orders for a demonstration of our training methods at the Imperial War College. Are your people ready for such a high-level evaluation?" Commander Morrison smiled with the confidence that had impressed the prince from their first meeting. "We are ready, Your Highness. My team has been working with your officers for months now, and the results speak for themselves." Lieutenant Collins and Sergeant Hayes joined the conversation as Captain Vorthak explained the details of the upcoming demonstration. The prince could see that all of the humans were excited about the opportunity to prove their methods on a larger stage. "Your Highness," Lieutenant Collins said, "will we be working with the same Vaxarian units that we have been training, or will we need to start fresh with new personnel?" You will work with our current personnel, the prince replied. The demonstration is meant to show what can be achieved when human and Vaxarian methods are properly integrated. Over the following weeks, the ship buzzed with preparation for the Imperial demonstration. Joint training exercises became even more intensive as both human and Vaxarian personnel worked to perfect their coordination. The prince was amazed at how naturally the two species had learned to work together. The improvements were obvious in every aspect of military operations. Vaxarian guards, who had once relied purely on superior firepower, now used terrain and psychology to multiply their effectiveness. Human advisors who had started as prisoners were now trusted members of tactical planning teams. But the most important change was in how everyone thought about warfare itself. The rigid adherence to established procedures had been replaced by flexible thinking that adapted to each new situation. Officers at every level were encouraged to suggest improvements and innovations rather than simply following orders. Prince Kethril received regular reports from other ships in the fleet, describing their reactions to news of the Human Vaxarian Military Advisory Council. Some commanders were requesting permission to implement similar programs, while others were demanding that the entire experiment be terminated. The political implications were becoming as significant as the military ones. Traditional elements within, the Empire saw the integration of human advisors as a dangerous precedent that could undermine Vaxarian cultural superiority. Progressive elements saw it as proof that the Empire could become stronger by learning from other species. Emperor Kethrin himself had remained officially silent about his son's controversial decisions, but Prince Kethril knew that his father was watching the situation very carefully. The upcoming demonstration would likely determine not just the future of the advisory program, but also the prince's own prospects for eventual succession to the throne. The day finally came when the Dominion's Edge departed for Vaxos Prime and the Imperial War College. Prince Kethril stood on the bridge watching the stars change position as they entered hyperspace. Beside him, Commander Morrison and Captain Vorthak were reviewing final preparations for the demonstration. "Your Highness," Commander Morrison said, "regardless of what happens at the demonstration, I want you to know that this has been an honor. You took a tremendous risk by giving us this opportunity, and we will never forget that." Prince Kethril looked at the human leader who had become both an advisor and a friend over the past months. "Commander, you and your people have already proven that taking risks can lead to great rewards. Whatever happens next, we have shown that cooperation between our species is not only possible, but beneficial." As the ship continued its journey toward the imperial capital, Prince Kethril reflected on how much had changed since that day in the detention facility. A simple observation of human prisoners had led to a revolution in military thinking that could transform the entire empire. The young prince had learned that true leadership meant being willing to challenge traditions when those traditions no longer served their purpose. He had discovered that strength came not from rigidly defending old ways, but from courageously embracing new possibilities. Most importantly, he had proven that even enemies could become allies when treated with respect and given opportunities to contribute their unique talents. The humans had started as conquered prisoners, but had become valued partners in building a stronger, more effective military force. The future remained uncertain, but Prince Kethril faced it with confidence. Whether the Imperial demonstration succeeded or failed, he knew that he had made the right choice. The Human Vaxarian Military Advisory Council had already changed his ship for the better, and those changes could not be undone regardless of political pressures. As the Dominion's Edge raced through hyperspace toward its date with destiny, Prince Kethril allowed himself to imagine a future where cooperation between species was normal rather than revolutionary. It was a future worth fighting for, and he was determined to make it reality.